becoming wealthy is actually really quite simple. You can write it on an index card, right? It is live on less than you make, regularly invest in highly diversified, low-cost index funds, and don't touch it for years, right? Like it's a three-step formula, right? But the problem is we're all humans at the end of the day, and we can be our own worst enemy. And so conquering your sort of mindset around money is incredibly important.
You didn't start your practice to barely hang on. I'll guess you started it for freedom, impact, and profit. This is Therapy for Your Money. I'm your host, Julie Harris. I'm an accountant, author of Profit First for Therapists, and CEO of GreenOak Accounting. Over the years, my team and I have partnered with hundreds of private practice owners, whether they're just getting started, scaling into thriving groups, or even preparing to sell. We've seen it all, and we know exactly what makes a practice tick financially. On Therapy for Your Money, I'll help you build a business that truly works for you. You'll get quick, actionable tips and episodes so that you can grow a profitable practice, increase your financial confidence, and pay yourself unapologetically. Because your work is way too important for you to burn out or go broke doing it. Love the podcast? Make sure to follow and give us a 5-star review. Here is Therapy for Your Money. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Therapy for Your Money. Today, we are talking about money, of course, but we're specifically talking about financial freedom and some strategies for therapists to thrive without burnout and make some good money, right? Take care of themselves financially. And so today's guest is Doug Vestal. Hi, Doug. How are you?
Hey, Julie, I'm great.
Good to have you on Therapy for Your Money. So you work, primarily with OTs, but I know that's very, very adjacent to mental health, which is kind of our primary focus over here. But so what are some of the main financial challenges that you see therapists have?
Yeah, I think I wrote a book called Financial Freedom for OTs, A Guide to Building Wealth Without Burnout, but
Mm-hmm.
it's applicable to anybody in the therapy
Yeah.
world that really has a combination of a couple of things, is what I see is relatively high debt, student loan debt,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not you went to a master's program or you did your PhD, doctorate, combined with relatively low wages, relative to that student loan debt. And so they stay stuck in basically this financial pickle that leads to a lot of stress, a lot of overwhelm. And being in a helping profession, they've kind of been conditioned from a very young age to have a lot of money guilt and shame around discussing money, around building wealth within their personal life. And that can lead to a lot of stress, both personally as well as professionally. And I think tackling the two sides, right? Like you wrote the book, Profit First, right? So you know as well as anyone, right? Tackling your income side as well as your expenses side on the personal level is really, really important to get out of student loan debt as quick as you can and cut out all the other sort of consumer debt, and then find ways to increase your wages. That could be through private pay, which is what I primarily support therapists with, or it could be a multitude of other income streams.
Yeah. So one of the very, very interesting things I find about working with, therapists in general is just how much sometimes you have to convince them that they should be making money. Of like, yeah, your practice does need to make a profit if you
Yep.
intend to like feed yourself. Basic necessities are pretty important. And if you're not putting a roof over your head, it's really hard to take care of others, right?
It really is. And
Yeah.
every poll that comes out talks about financial stress is the number one stress in most
Hmm.
people's lives,
Yeah.
right? But because money is so taboo in our culture, we don't talk about it. And so all of us are going around being incredibly stressed about money and the role that money plays in our life, whether or not that means, upgrading to a car that is going to be more fuel efficient, whether or not that's going on vacation with your family and building those memories, whether or not it's just buying really, really healthy food. You look at any Maslow hierarchy of needs, and money plays a role in each part of that pyramid. And so it's always fascinating to me that as a culture, and especially in the therapy world, we're not addressing this more, because therapists would address this type of stress in sessions with their clients, but many therapists have trouble doing that in their own personal life.
Yeah. And I often find myself wishing that we would be able to catch folks like before the program, right? Not to say don't do it, just to say like, hey, let's talk about the financials of this program because I've seen like first I've never asked my therapist like where did you graduate what school did you graduate from? I honestly don't care, right?
Yeah,
It's like if you could, can you help me, yes or no? That
exactly.
is, but like so going to a private college versus a public school, like very big difference financially with a zero return later on, right? Like it's
Exactly.
just it kind of snowballs a lot of the financial stress sometimes.
Oh, it totally does. And I'll say something that's maybe more applicable to OT, but like my wife is an occupational therapist and she graduated with $150,000 of student loan debt because she went to NYU. She went to a,
Yeah.
a private
Yeah.
school. And after we got our act together, we actually paid off that student loan debt in 3 years through some
Wow.
strategies that I talk
Yeah.
about in the book. But what's amazing is when OTs bill, they bill per CPT code. They get reimbursed per CPT code. And in that, there is never a differentiation according to what school you went to, what additional certifications you have,
Yeah.
or even your number of years as a therapist. And so I think it's a real travesty that these things aren't taught earlier in
Yeah.
a therapist's, sort of career, because I think they would make slightly different decisions, or at least go into it with a little bit more eyes wide open and a
Yeah.
strategy coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have the money to do it, then great, right? Like if your parents are paying for it, go to the expensive school if you want to, but like sometimes that's not. Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
that's not the case. Okay. So, Doug, before we go on to practical strategies, I let you mentioned your wife is an OT and tell us a little bit about your background because I find that really fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm not a therapist or an occupational therapist, mental health therapist or anything. But I actually worked on Wall Street for 15 years. So I was managing director at the second largest investment bank in the US. And I worked in New York City for 12 years, managing teams in New York City, London, and Hong Kong. And then they moved me to Paris, France for 3 years, where I helped start the European office post-Brexit. But during this time, my wife and I had the crazy idea to start an OT private pay practice in 2014, right when our son was 6 weeks old and my daughter was 2 years old. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
everybody looked at us like we were crazy, but for us it was like now or never. Like we have
Yeah.
to do this because we wanted more occupational choice. We were looking, my wife's name is Lindsay. We were looking at what her hospital schedule was, how many clients a day she had to see, the lack of flexibility from a scheduling perspective. And that just wasn't the type of mom she wanted to be. She
Yeah.
wanted to have a lot more freedom in her schedule and still be able to help clients. And so we started the first private pay practice in New York City, ran by an OT that specialized in pelvic floor therapy. And my wife didn't want to do anything from the business perspective. Like she just really wanted to see clients, like she went to school to be an
Super
OT. She,
fair. Yeah.
yes, like that was it. And so she said, well, Doug, if we're going to do this, I'm going to need your help. So I'm going to need you to do all of the business stuff. And so using what I knew on Wall Street and my background. So I did all of the sales, the marketing, all of the systems, the operations, the finance, like everything that needed to happen to actually have the practice work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that goes into it. And I really enjoyed it. And over time, we started having more and more therapists reach out to us going like, how did you guys start? Because starting is still relatively new in the OT world compared to mental health therapists or SLPs and PTs. And around that time, like I had accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish on Wall Street and was looking to retire. And so I said, what's going to be my second act? Like what are the things that really light me up? What do I feel like I'm good at and that I could contribute to? And it was supporting OTs to start private pay practices. So I have a course called Private Pay MBA that walks them through all of the lessons learned from us starting our practice over 10 years ago, as well as the hundreds of therapists that I've supported since then. And then in working with this population, I saw so many of them struggle from a personal finance perspective.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
really enjoy supporting them on the business side. But sometimes, many times they are starting businesses to escape their current financial situation because they don't have the
Ooh,
reimbursement, right?
I love, yeah, like so well said, right? You're trying to escape something, like running towards something else that's sometimes not better.
Exactly. And comes with a lot of pitfalls, comes with a
Yeah.
lot of new skills that you have to
Yeah.
develop and hone or hire for. And, I talked about us paying off the $150,000 of student loan debt in 3 years. My wife graduated 14 years ago, and we still have classmates of hers that are paying off their student loan. And in fact, some of them, depending on what program they were in, their balance is actually higher. And I just saw all of these really heart-centered professionals that have the right intention, but maybe not the right strategies from a personal finance
Mm,
perspective in their life. And
yeah.
so I wanted to be able to write a book that gives back to that population because I think it's so incredible. Well, I can't do that, but I
Same.
can do from a personal finance and business perspective. And so the first book that was published a couple of months ago is that Financial Freedom for OTs, a guide to building wealth without burnout.
Amazing. Well, so let's talk through some of those, like the practical strategies. Like how can can an OT or a therapist get to financial freedom on personally?
Yeah. So it's funny. It's similar to what you talk about in your book, Profit First for Therapists. And it's the idea that you pay yourself first, right? If
Mm,
you look
yeah.
at any study of millionaires or people that become wealthy, all of them had the discipline to pay themselves first. The average American, what they will do is they will get their paycheck deposited on the first. They will spend, 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 look at it on their account balance on the 29th, and then go, whatever is remaining, maybe I'll put that in an emergency fund. Maybe there's a thing called an IRA. Maybe I should contribute to that, right? But they save what's left. And the secret to building wealth over a long period of time, and it's going to take a long period of time because
Yeah.
there's no get rich quick schemes. Those are all scams, right? Happens over decades. It happens over decades, is paying yourself first and getting on what I call a 50-30-20 plan. So I hate the term budgeting. I don't like feeling restricted when it comes to your life, but it does take a little bit of discipline and go, okay, if I can cover 50% goes to the needs,
Hmm.
30% goes to wants, and then 20% goes to saving for the future. And you automate that from the very beginning so that you don't even see that money touch your account. You just take 20% off the top and you automate that. You give that enough time, you are virtually guaranteed to become wealthy, right? Like
Yeah.
the odds are in your favor. And they're in your favor due to what Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, which is compound interest. And so I have a great, sort of example illustrating the power of compound interest that I go
Yeah.
into in the book, which is, would you rather, and you may have heard this before, would you rather have a penny today or a penny today that doubles every day for 30 days or $1 million today?
I'm
So,
pretty sure I want the penny today that doubles every day. Like
yes,
I'm not doing the math in my in my head that fast, but I'm pretty sure that's what I want, even though it sounds counterintuitive. Is that
it,
right?
it
Yeah.
totally sounds counterintuitive, right? Because most people
It's
would
just a
go, well,
penny.
a penny that doubles, like, isn't that going to be worth pennies? But after 30 days, it's actually worth $5.4 million.
Ooh, okay.
And that is just illustrates the power of compounding. And so knowing this from the very beginning, knowing that if you're in your early 20s and you're setting aside $400 a month, $500 a month, and you're doing that for 20, 25 years, like you are virtually guaranteed to become wealthy, right? So knowing that from the very beginning, and then the thing that holds a lot of people back from doing that type of aggressive savings, because if you're only saving 3% of your paycheck right now, or 5%, 20% is going to sound virtually impossible,
Yeah,
right?
it will.
And many times it's due to the levels of debt that we have. Like we have debt on our car, we have debt on our mortgage, we have debt from student loans. And so employing some student loan payoff strategies from an early perspective. So looking at it from like, how do I get out of debt in 3 to 5 years? Not how do I keep this on, like a bad rash for 20 years
For 20
is
years, yeah.
is really, really important because you need that extra money every month to be able to put towards your savings for your financial future versus just paying the bank back with interest on a degree that you got 18 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and so my opinion too on the saving on a regular basis is that it's a lot more about the saving muscle than the amount, right? Like if you're
Yeah,
starting in your 20s with $25 a week, that's still better than waiting till you're 30 and then saving $100 a week. Like you will be farther ahead, but it's that building of the muscle. Like, oh, I don't need this. I don't know that it exists. It's just over there. And then you just keep growing it and growing it. And like, oh, let's make that 50 and now 100 and now 200, now 500. Like that makes such a big difference because on the tax side, right, what we see often is clients will come to us and say, well, I think I'm going to make an IRA contribution, but I'll just do it at the end of the year, right? When I do my taxes.
Yep.
And if you wait to that point, often there's no money left, right? There's like, oh, well, I'm going to do it next year. But if you just do a little bit at a time, there will be money in it. It might not be as much. Like I'd rather see $100 a month and then $1,200 in an IRA than like, oh, well, maybe I'll be able to do 4,000 later. And then you just never do it, right? Like
Exactly.
actually doing it is so much better than talking about doing more. And I think people like hold themselves back because of that so much, right? They're like, well, it should be more, so I'm going to wait.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's nothing.
They start to shame themselves and go like, well,
Yes.
if I can't do the big amount, it's like the penny analogy. It's going to be
Yeah.
peanuts. It's going to be pennies, but this, compound interest like really, really works. It's magic over time. And yes, like 100%, if you're in your 20s and you're doing $100 a month, like you can be ahead of someone who starts when they're 45 and is saving $10,000 a year just because time is really on your
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
The other thing I really like, especially for therapists, if they're in solo practices, is a solo 401k.
Mhm.
Like I think that that is one of like God's greatest gifts to financial planning. And the reason being is because you can just save so much money tax free in a solo 401k.
Mhm.
Obviously, you can't have partners and everything that can only
And
be you and your
employees. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. You can do it for yourself and your spouse, which is what my wife and I have always done. And it's fantastic because if you're working for another organization, the amount of 401k match that you're going to get is normally pretty small, like 3 to 7%, but the IRS rules actually state that between you as the employee and you as the employer, you can contribute up to $70,000 a year tax free in the
Yeah.
solo 401k.
Yeah.
And it's just a great way to supercharge your retirement savings using stuff that's already written into the tax code in the US. It's there, it's there for you to take advantage of and for you to use. And it takes like 5 minutes to start
Yeah.
up a solo 401k. It's super easy.
Yeah. And the caveat, of course, is like you have to have that money actually available to
Yes.
put in, right? Like that is kind of the big asterisk. Like it's a
Yep.
great, 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 great vehicle. Um, but you've got to be making ideally more, a lot more than that to be able to
Yes.
max it to
To
max it
max it
out.
out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some of the other strategies that you recommend?
Yeah. So I think largely for me, it's conquering your mindset. That's where I
Hmm.
see most people getting held back is that we all have these limiting beliefs when it comes to money, right? Either that you're not worth it, either that like money is the root of all evil,
Mm,
like you shouldn't, money doesn't grow on trees. And so what ends up happening, like becoming wealthy is actually really quite simple. You can write it on an index card, right? It is live on less than you make, regularly invest in highly diversified low cost index funds and don't touch it for years, right? Like it's a three-step formula, right? But the problem is we're all humans at the end of the day and we can be our own worst enemy. And so conquering your sort of mindset around money is incredibly important. And what I see happens a lot is when I'm talking to therapists, they'll say things like, well, I can't save, I can't budget, I can't raise my fees. It's all this like I can't fill in the blank. And we know that that sort of avoidance behavior is also often like a trauma response. And I
mhm,
think a lot of us have financial trauma that started when we were very young, from looking at the interactions that we had with our parents, with our peers, what we saw on media. And we've just become to think that this is either something that is the root of all problems or the answer to every single problem. And the answer is really somewhere in between, right? That it's a tool and it's a vehicle for you to live the life that you want to live and to have the ability to give back to causes and foundations that are really super important. And so for me, like it's super easy to become like wealthy, like, but it requires you doing it, as you said, right? It
Yeah.
requires you taking the action. And that's where I think the mindset piece and overcoming those limiting beliefs and really sitting down. I have an exercise I talk about in the book of really sitting down and looking at, I think we all have these keystone memories from when we were young, right? These sort of like little incidences that we replay in our head like all the time. And what I do is I challenge people to sit quietly in a room by themselves and really explore those childhood memories and see if money played a role in any of those interactions. What role was money present? Was it a source of stress? Was it a source of anxiety? Because many times parents, and I have to be careful with this with parenting my two young kids, is how you show up and talk to your kids about money is going to greatly influence what they're going to do
Yeah.
as adults. Are they fearful about it? Is there shame associated with it? Is it held over their head as a reward, so they start to resent money and the power that comes, is associated with money? And so, really understanding that from your childhood perspective, so you can then move on from it or use any sort of like techniques, CBT, like somatics to really conquer that, I think is really key because then the actual practical implementation is actually quite easy once you fix the mindset part.
Doc, I kind of want to put you on the spot and ask you, like, what are some of your core childhood memories around money?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
So
I'm curious if you're willing to share, is
yeah,
there?
yeah, I'm willing to share. I've never shared this public actually. So this is you have an exclusive.
All
Um
right.
so my parents divorced when I was 7 and I bounced around from each home. So about every 3 years I'd go from moving living with my mom to then like living with my dad. And I remember one time my parents didn't get along. Like it wasn't an
Okay.
amicable divorce. And so um my father and my mother had gotten into a fight about something. And um, I had said something, I think, to my granddad. Like I don't really remember exactly what it was, but I did something I wasn't supposed to do that my father didn't approve of. And then he took me out and he bought me a whole bunch of toys. I was probably like 10 at the time. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like we're in a toy store. I had no idea why we were there. He was buying me this, he was buying me the other thing. And then we walk out of the toy store. And the first thing he says to me, I say, thank you for buying this. And the first thing he says to me is he goes, well, maybe now you'll learn to keep your mouth shut. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that was intense. And I didn't remember it. I didn't remember it until like probably 10 years ago. And when like we started taking the personal finance stuff like really serious in our household. And I was like, oh, that actually, my response to that was I want to be so independent that no one has control over me. And so, like, it really lit a fire in me to go, I don't need a person for this thing. I don't need a person for that thing. And like, I really want to develop financial independence so that like I can make those choices and not have to be dependent upon someone else.
That is really powerful. Thank you for sharing. That is really neat to see kind of that um yeah, that correlation. And also, like, I'm feeling my feelings right now because my parents divorced when I was 7. They're like, we did not have a toy store situation, but I just feel this very deeply of like, yeah, this is very parallel too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to depend on anyone. I want to make sure
Yes.
that like I always financially want to make sure that I am okay. Like everything is okay. There's money hidden away over here, a little bit hidden over,
Yes.
like just in case everything is okay. Right.
You
Like
never know.
you feel
Exactly.
that too?
I 100% do. And, my parents, they had two sides of the coin because my mom was a public school teacher. So she taught middle school math for 30 years. And then my dad worked for a pharmaceutical company. And so in my mom's household, money was really kind of the root of all evil.
Yeah.
Like it was not something really talked about. She was a school teacher. There was no possibility for salary increases. And then with my dad, he really mismanaged his finances. And so we would go out to eat, his credit card would get declined, bill collectors were calling the house. But in my mind, he was a really smart guy, and I couldn't understand why he was making good money, just wasn't keeping any of it. And so I learned from a really young age, it's not about how much money you make, it's how much of it you keep at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that really motivated me with all the other stuff to go, all right, the moment I start working, the moment my wife starts working, we're maxing out our 401ks, we're maxing out our retirement accounts, and we're doing that from the very, very beginning because I don't want to end up in that same place that I saw them.
Okay. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So it was more of like a not that, I'm not doing that,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Lead by non example.
it
Um,
totally was. Yeah.
if you'll indulge me, I want to share a little story with you. My dad was the financially responsible one, and my parents they were also divorced, and my mom could like it would burn a hole in her pocket. And one of my children, I have three children, one of my children is like that. Like she will get her allowance and like it burns a hole in her pocket. She must spend it right away. And I don't relate to that. Um, one of my like before I graduated from high school, one of my dad's requirements was that I read a book. We all had to go through it. The book was called The Wealthy Barber. And it's like a 80s, 90s, early 90s version of like personal finance, responsibility, live on less than you make, that kind of thing. But like that book, because I was forced to read it, I actually really did enjoy it. But that was kind of my first glimpse into personal finance, and it was more of like a, wait a second, why are you doing all of this
Right.
also? Right. But like, okay, I have some tools in my toolbox. And like actually in college in my 20s, I read a lot of personal finance books because I was just really interested in like, okay, what other knowledge is there out there to learn? So
Yeah.
that was
Oh,
my, yeah.
that's great. The book that really changed it for me was around the same time of all this happening, The Millionaire Next Door came out. And so
That was on
that,
my list. I read
yeah,
that too. Yeah.
was a
So fascinating, right?
exactly like really turns it on its head for what most people think wealthy people look like and
Yeah.
live like and everything. And I was just like, okay, that came out when I was maybe 16 or 17 and around all of the time of this. And it really helped like get my mindset right for approaching like my working years.
Yeah. And also, as the accountant, right, I can tell you, I'm sure you've seen this as well. Like a lot of times, the people who look like they're making a lot of money are not often doing as well as they look, right? Because like we see the tax
Yeah.
returns, we see, oh, like, oh, you're driving this fancy car. Oh, wait, like you're bouncing checks, right? We see the details. And then the people who look really unassuming
Yes.
and they're driving, the 4-year-old Toyota, they live in a modest house. Like they sometimes have, they're making $1-2 million a year in just in income every single year. And like they're just living well below their means. Yeah, they do nice things, but it's not flashy a lot of the time, which is always fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think we don't understand that spending money is the quick route to have no money, And so
Yeah.
it's like, when Rihanna went through her bankruptcy, she sued her financial advisors, and and on the stand, the financial advisor said, "Well, did I really have to tell someone if you spend all of the money to buy things, you'll end up with things and no money?" And it's like, yes, actually, we do need to say this because we conflate the people who live in the fancy house, who drive the nice car and everything. It's like, well, they spent a lot of money to make those purchases. What is remaining in their bank account
Yeah.
for a rainy day and for replacing their full-time income?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's often not what you
Yeah.
think. Yeah. Doug, this has been a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you. I would love for you to tell us about a little bit more about the book, about your program, where folks can find you.
Yeah. So the book is Financial Freedom for OTs, A Guide to Building Wealth Without Burnout. It's available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. Even though OT is in the title, it is really meant for any therapy profession who resonates with what we've been talking about today. So high student loans, relatively low wages, some money, guilt, and limiting beliefs around, approaching wealth building. And then you can head over to freedomofpractice.com, which is my website, and look at the courses and resources I have there. I support therapists opening private pay practices so they can have more time freedom and money freedom and flexibility in their schedule. That program's called Private Pay MBA, and it walks you through all of the steps and every single thing that you need to start a successful private pay practice.
Amazing. We will put that in the show notes as well. And I can vouch that OT and mental health and PT, like physical therapy, speech language, they're all very, very similar. Like they're very different practices
Yes,
on the, what you're doing every day side, but in on the back end, as far as the business side, very, very similar in personal finance. So very applicable.
100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doug. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Julie.
That's it for today's episode of Therapy for Your Money. Catch us on Instagram and Facebook at Therapy for Your Money Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to GreenOak Accounting on YouTube. Until next time.
The information contained in this podcast represents the host and guest's general opinions and should not be construed as personalized accounting and tax advice. Listeners should consider all facts and circumstances before applying this information and seek appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. Any info provided does not constitute accounting, tax, or legal advice.